How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. I feel relaxed. It was a slow morning. I slept in. So I feel like my body is awakened. On my bike ride over, I was thinking about creativity because I knew that we were probably going to interview. And I was like, how am I creative? And I was like, I think I'm creative in the ways that I approach people and the conversations and the topics that I ask about. And it's like not the most generic way to think of creativity, but there is an art to it. There's an art to conversation. There's an art to making people feel seen and heard. So yes, I'm creative in that way for sure.
Can you give any examples of how that plays out? Like
in therapy?
Yeah.
I think specifically this past week, I had a new client who right off the bat said, I don't like talking to people. I don't like talking about my emotions. And I think hearing that, a lot of people would say like, oh, why? Or like, oh, you know, what happened to you that made you feel like you couldn't talk? But for me, hearing that, it was like, okay, that's okay. And just asking her just genuine questions about herself. And while she was talking about herself, she got deep into emotions. And so she caught herself and she was like, wow, I actually haven't talked to anybody about that yet. And so again, just me kind of letting her lead and not pushing her into anything is a good way to just let them go. And if they don't get in deep, that's fine. If they don't talk about emotions, that's fine. But it's also a chance for them to just go with the flow. And they surprise themselves and they talk about more than they think they're going to talk about. And so there's an art to just not pushing people into specific things.
Yeah, it seems like the phrase giving space, like giving them the space, like creating a space for them.
Yeah, because I've learned in just grad school and then actually internship where I got to start seeing clients that a lot of people don't get the space to be free and to talk and without judgment. There's usually some judgment that they feel, and so they stop themselves from talking and disclosing and sharing. And yeah, so it is nice when people, it seems to me when people are just like free and go with the flow, because they feel my presence and they know that like I'm just listening. I'm not trying to insert my opinion. I'm not trying to steer them anywhere. It's kind of just like we're just going with it.
Yeah.
So that's helpful.
Yeah, a lot of times it's more just like opening the floor up. It seems to me with conversations, interviews, things like that, more so than like, tell me this right now.
Exactly. Yeah. And it helps being just kind of like, as a therapist, a third party who it's like non-biased and just, we're just two humans. We're getting to know each other. I always tell my clients that I work from a very collaborative, client-focused approach, which basically means we're working together. This is a relationship and we are building just like any other relationship, friendships, all of that. It's just like in this room, yes, I'm a professional and there is no judgment, but also we're building, and that is just really important. So I treat it like a relationship.
What do you think people can gain from that kind of mindset just in their lives?
You mean the mindset of going with the flow, or?
Yeah, and even just with people's relationships. So I mean, you see a lot of relationships. Like, what is that something people should strive for?
Yeah, I think the art of listening is important too in relationships. And I mean, there has to be a genuine foundation of like you being curious about the person and the relationship and yourself. So I think it's going back to just like holding space for people and not taking things too personally, I think is helpful too, if that answers your question. It's like we all have our lived experiences and our just thoughts and feelings, and it's good to be mindful of that. You know, it's hard in the moment to be mindful, but I think just, again, holding space for people and yourself gives you a lot of room. And it's an easy phrase to say, like, holding space, but when you're actually willing to do it, you realize how helpful and difficult it is sometimes. But yeah.
How would you tell someone to get into that mindset if they're kind of questioning or not used to that type of communication?
Yeah. I think the first thing is being self-aware of the fact that it is difficult for you for some reason, whatever reason that is, to communicate and hold space effectively for somebody else. And I think challenging why it's difficult for you, what kind of triggers you emotionally that closes you off from just being open with somebody. Because a lot of people they know what they feel inside, but they don't know how to articulate that, and they don't want to for some reason. Like, it just feels too heavy, overwhelming, whatever the feeling is. So they close themselves off, and it's a disservice to you. So I would say to challenge those thoughts and feelings, and just like, why don't I feel safe enough, or why don't I want to talk about this or talk to this person? So I think it's a lot of just also being gentle with yourself, because I like the phrase, it's a very popular one, of like, your feelings are valid. So whatever you're feeling is okay, but it's just going a step further and trying to think about why you feel those ways, like what's happening. And the more questions you have for yourself, the more you can just think about it, and hopefully maybe talk to somebody about it. But before that, just questioning those feelings.
You're definitely really good at feeling your feelings and working through them.
I am.
How do you work through a negative feeling?
That's a good question. I have gotten to the point in my life where once I have an uncomfortable feeling, I ask myself why, and I'm usually able to know exactly where the feeling is coming from, whether it's like in past insecurity that kind of keeps coming up for whatever reason. And I tell myself that it's okay as long as my reaction is, as long as I can check my reaction, the feeling is okay, and not being too hard on myself for having that feeling. Like, insecurity keeps popping into my mind because I feel like I battle with a few of those. So it's like, oh wait, hold on. We have a text. It's ready.
Oh.
They're like, you have 10 minutes. We'll hold it for you for 10 minutes. It's like, I don't know. It looks really good. Yeah, when I started my YouTube channel, it was difficult for me to kind of put myself out there because I'm not used to everybody or certain people, especially strangers, knowing my thoughts on things. And so it was a bit intimidating, but I also figured out how to be more confident in my speaking, which was fun to kind of discover. And also that I actually enjoy talking to the camera. So that was a nice challenge for me to just put myself out there and talk. And if it resonates with people, then it's fun. And if it gives people kind of a new perspective, then that's also great. But it was nice.
How did you get there with that? You're getting to the comfort level.
I think practice for me was key. And also sometimes I would just like talk to myself, like before getting on camera. Okay, what am I looking at my topic of what I'm talking about for the video? It's like just kind of saying it out loud, and it makes it easier when it's time to film yourself to just talk, because you kind of have the content in your mind of what you're going to say, and you just kind of let it flow. But practice, for sure, for me, was helpful. Just like with most things for me, I have to practice them.
How do you feel about being authentic? Is that something that you have to consciously think about, or is that something that you think just comes with time?
I think authenticity comes with time and confidence. I think for me, it took a while for me to figure out who I was, and I'm still figuring it out, but I feel more confident in that journey of knowing what I like, what I don't like, and just doing what feels good for me. And so yeah, I feel like it doesn't take a lot of willpower mentally for me to be authentic these days anyway, but that's something that I had to learn too, and to just get more confident and comfortable with, because it's hard sometimes.
Is that something you notice with sessions with clients as well? That you can tell when someone's not being authentic, or that you can tell they're kind of putting something on?
Yeah, that's actually interesting. It is, which I didn't realize that until I started, especially with this new job. When I would meet these clients, I could tell when they were holding back and giving me polished answers, opposed to just kind of like going off the dome and not thinking so much about what they're saying. So I can tell when people are thinking really hard just by how they structure the sentences, and especially if it's a question that I ask that doesn't really require a lot of deep thought. It's just like, oh, how do you feel about your mom? And there's kind of like a look that's given, and then it's like a very polished answer that just may not fit the conversation. So I can kind of tell, okay, this person is guarded or holding back, which is fine. But yeah, there's definitely a feeling that I get when I can sense and see that people are kind of not fully, giving their thoughts.
And then how do you deal with that as someone who's trying to kind of open people up? Because I feel like that's a kind of a universal thing for conversations, but
Yeah.
especially because you're an expert at it, what would you say are ways to kind of get deeper with somebody?
Yeah. I think the best way to create and then sustain deep conversations and that rapport is not to push, is not to push people into telling me something. I think when they're ready, they will. And of course, sometimes I have to check myself mentally, like, okay, if I ask a question and it's clear that they're not giving me an authentic, it's a very polished answer, I don't push. It's their choice. And I think that's the thing about creating that space for people, giving them the choice to choose if they want to disclose or if they don't. And it also takes time to build rapport, to build our therapeutic relationship. So even though I can tell, like, okay, this person is not ready, that's also okay with me. For it to actually go somewhere and to be real, it has to just flow. And so they'll be ready when they're ready. I don't take it personally. It's just how it is sometimes. Yeah, it takes longer for other people, or most people actually, to feel comfortable. So I go with that. Yeah.
What do you think is the value of getting to that level with people?
I think there's value in honesty. There's value in just letting out your thoughts, even if there is shame attached to it, there's guilt attached to them. It's such a release to let those thoughts go, to let those perceptions go. This kid is cute. And a lot of people don't know that feeling until they do it, until they let something out, they let a thought out, and it's like, oh wow, that felt good. And so I think there's value in, again, honesty and just being transparent and trusting who you're telling, the other person. And I think it's helpful as a professional. They know that unless they're harming themselves or someone else, I'm not going to tell anybody. And so there's that safety of, okay, this person, I can trust them because we have that rapport, they're professional, they're not judging me. And so there's a lot of value in that safety. So yeah, so just that release is nice to see when I do see it. And it's very distinct too. They either say it or it's kind of just the look that they have on their face, but you can tell that it they kind of took off that emotional labor, like the backpack is what I always call it. And they kind of just crack a little and let somebody in and let some stuff out and let it go.
So when you're dealing with people with relationships, how is that different when you're kind of facilitating people's communication to each other?
Yeah, thinking about seeing couples and then seeing individuals, couples bring such an intense dynamic to it, but it's also can be really fun because they come in thinking that they need help on this one issue, like communication. And then as they're talking and expressing and like verbalizing things, it's like, oh wait, I have like 4 other issues that I've had for a while, but kind of just chalks it up to communication being the main issue. And so you get into these different pockets of ideas and concerns, and personally for me, for them it's a bit uncomfortable kind of disclosing that in front of their partner because there can be some judgment. But for me, it's good to see that they're having these realizations that their lived experiences matter, their insecurities that they're bringing into the relationship matter. And so it's just a whole different other intense dynamic with couples. But again, it's fun because a lot of the time they're having these thoughts for the first time, like they're making these connections like, oh, this happened in my childhood and I brought it into the relationship and like, I didn't know, they're just making these really big connections that it's nice to see, and it feels like they're retaining these things. It feels like they are putting in the work because they are. So it's also very challenging, to be quite frank, because you're not just dealing with one person, you're dealing with 2, and they just both have to really want it. And they both have to want to give empathy to the other, which can be really difficult, especially when you're frustrated with your partner. It's hard for a lot of couples to move past that. But it's a slow process. I like to say, like, take your time, be gentle with yourself. Every day, you're not going to want to talk about heavy issues, and that's also okay. Just giving your partner that space and empathy, and that can go a long way in itself. So couples dynamic is hard, but rewarding too. Yeah.
How about just for individuals, like how do you see people finding some level of fulfillment?
That's a good question.
So I'm sure it's different for different people, but
yeah.
Have you noticed any things that tend to be like an aha moment for a lot of people, or?
The first thing that comes to mind is confidence building, and I have a tendency to, if I see, especially I'm thinking of one client specifically who struggles with self-esteem and self-confidence, and so highlighting and assisting them and highlighting their strengths, whatever they are in whatever capacity, is a really great reminder, because a lot of the time we kind of have this, like, these glasses, like this fog, and we're so self-critical of ourselves, and just our expectations of who we are so high sometimes, and we forget, or they forget, how much they do. They minimize their accomplishments a lot. And so I like to guide them in like really thinking about what they bring to the table and all of the great strengths that they do have that they don't think about on the day-to-day. So I think that helps with getting them to remember what they have to offer in any way. It's like the saying of treat yourself like a friend. You know, when you realize that you're talking down on yourself or being self-critical, it's like, would you say that to a friend? You probably wouldn't. So don't say it to yourself. And it can go a long way. It's all about, I think, being intentional, because we all have negative thoughts, every single one of us. And so I think it's helpful to just catch, when you can, catch yourself and remember again what you have to offer and the great things about you.
That seems like something everybody could do.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people are very critical of themselves and kind of tie themselves to what they produce or their work and things like that.
It's true. And if they're not producing, then the self-worth kind of goes down to the ground. Yeah.
Do you ever have that feeling, or like a feeling that you should be doing more?
Less these days, but I've definitely felt that way. I think growing up, it just how, at least for me, how I was raised, it was kind of like blend in and kind of keep your head down, do your work, study, do that. And when I wasn't studying, I felt like, okay, what can I be doing to like get ahead, I guess. So yeah, so these days I'm pretty relaxed and a lot more gentle on myself, because I also think as you get older, your perspective changes, and things that seemed so important to me back in the day just aren't anymore. There's a lot of growth happening, and so yeah, when it comes to productivity, I'm not down on myself if I'm not productive in a day. I don't feel bad if I lay around. And for me, rest is necessary, because I can feel the difference when I'm not rested, and it just doesn't feel good, so I don't like to feel that. And so so these days, no, I don't beat myself up that much.
Yeah, giving yourself permission in some ways.
Yeah, for sure. It was a process, though.
Did that bring to mind any wise words that you'd pass on to people who are feeling like they can't be themselves, or they're looking for something, some way, some strategy to kind of feel like they can take control of themselves and their life?
The first thing that came to mind, because I used to journal and I don't much anymore, which I guess I kind of transferred it into like a to-do type of thing and not like writing my thoughts down. I can just kind of work it out in my head. But I think journaling is helpful, and just doesn't have to be like an extensive situation, but just like writing down some of your thoughts and kind of just getting them out of your head and onto paper. And also making a list of what you want, because I think it's helpful to see that and to kind of have that accountability for yourself, like that you can resort back to, and like, okay, I wrote this down, this is something that I'm interested in, and let me see where it goes. It doesn't have to go anywhere, but I think again it's helpful to put it down on paper and to just dissect it, to just be curious about yourself. At the end of the day, it's like there's so many different things you can do and explore, but I think it all stems down to being serious about it and yourself, if that makes sense. It's like, I don't want it to sound like it's like easy because it's not, but I think people owe it to themselves to just dive deeper into themselves. And it sounds really general, but a lot of people don't do it. And so they feel empty and unfulfilled. And it's because they don't really know themselves. They haven't done the inner work. And some of that inner work is healing. But yeah, there's just different ways to go about it. But it's helpful to question and to write things down. And I think that's the first step. Yeah.
I like that. Thanks, Bit.
Oh.